video that was requested quite a few times. I did a video on facts about Greek mythology, and I had a couple of people asking for facts about Norse mythology, and a few people asked for Norse mythological stories, and that's exactly what we've got today. I'm going to be reading through some of the most significant / interesting, although there are plenty of other interesting ones from Norse mythology. Let me know if you enjoy this video, because there is plenty of stories and legends, etc. to do a part 2. I think at one point I will also do a history video on the Vikings, to kind of go hand in hand. But yeah, I reckon without further ado, let's introduce Norse mythology stories. The body of stories that we today call Norse mythology formed one of the centerpieces of the pagan Norse religion. These are the tales that Viking poets recited in dimly lit halls to the captivated attendees of grand feasts, and which fathers and mothers told to their children around roaring fires on long winter nights. They are epic myths of war, magic, love, betrayal, triumph and ruin. Not only did they provide deep wells of religious meaning for the Vikings, they also speak to much that is timeless and universal in the human condition, and so continue to provide modern audiences from around the world with wonder, entertainment, and even spiritual nourishment for some. Since the pre-Christian Norse never wrote down their myths, theirs was an almost exclusively oral culture. The primary sources upon which our current knowledge of Norse mythology rests were all written while the Norse were converting to Christianity or generations thereafter. Thus, we can't be absolutely certain that the stories as they've come down to us are the same as the tales the pagan Vikings would have told to one another. But while the myths from the Old Norse Eddas and sagas may not be pure, they nevertheless contain much that certainly is an authentic product of the Viking Age. And in any case, they're all we've got today. The chronology of Norse mythology has a clear beginning in the creation myth and a clear ending in the tale of Ragnarok. But most of what happens in between those two bookends doesn't occur in any particular order, and certainly doesn't follow a strictly linear trajectory. Sometimes we find that myth A assumes that myth B has already taken place, yet myth B assumes that myth A has already taken place. This is because Norse mythology was never a neat, tidy system. The Viking mind didn't demand the same kind of strict, rational codification that the modern mind does. Instead, the Vikings seem to have been much more concerned with how much the myths spoke to their hearts and imaginations, as well as the degree to which the myths reflected and made sense of the world as they experienced it. I personally love that. So without further ado, here are the main Norse myths, and I'm going to pick a few, but we should probably begin with the creation of the cosmos. The Norse creation myth, or cosmogony, is perhaps one of the richest in all of world literature. First, let's look at this exceptionally colourful story itself, then consider how the Vikings may have interpreted it and found meaning in it. So, we have the origin of the cosmos. Before there was soil or sky or any green thing, there was only the gaping abyss of Ginnungagap. I'm going to apologise for the pronunciation. This chaos of perfect silence and darkness lay between the homeland of elemental fire, Muspelheim, and the homeland of elemental ice, Niflheim. Frost from Niflheim and billowing flames from Muspelheim crept toward each other until they met in Ginnungagap. Amid the hissing and spluttering, the fire melted the ice and the drops formed themselves into Ymir, the first of the godlike but destructive As the frost continued to melt, a cow, a dumla, which means abundance of humming, emerged from it. She nourished Ymir with her milk, and she in turn was nourished by salt licks in the ice. Her licks slowly uncovered Buri, the first of the Aesir tribe of gods. Buri had a son named Bor, who married Besla, the daughter of the giant Bolthorn. The half-god, half-giant children of Bor and Besla were Odin, who became the chief of the Aesir gods, and his two brothers, Vili and Vi. Odin and his brothers slew Ymir and set about constructing the world from his corpse. They fashioned the oceans from his blood, the soil from his skin and muscles, vegetation from his hair, clouds from his brains, and the sky from his skull. 4 dwarfs, corresponding to the 4 cardinal points, held Ymir's skull aloft above the earth. The gods eventually formed the first man and woman, Ask and Embla, from 2 tree trunks, and built the fence around their dwelling place, Midgard, to protect them from the giants. Thematically, Ymir is the personification of the chaos before creation, which is also depicted as the impersonal void of Ginnungagap. Both Ymir and Ginnungagap are ways of talking about limitless potential that isn't actualized, that hasn't yet become the particular things that we find in the world around us. This is why the Vikings described it as a void. It is nothingness, but it nevertheless contains the basic stuff out of which the gods can make true things. In this case, the primal matter is Ymir's body, which the gods tear apart to craft the elements. It's extremely fitting for Ymir to be the progenitor of the giants, for this is the general role the giants occupy in Norse myth. They are the forces of formless chaos, who are always threatening to corrupt and ultimately overturn the gods' created order. And at Ragnarok they eventually succeed. But the giants are more than just forces of destruction. In the words of medievalist Margaret Ross, characteristically the gods covered important natural resources which the giants own, then steal them and turn them to their own advantage, by utilising them to create culture. That is, they put the giants' raw materials to work for themselves. These raw materials are of diverse kinds and include intellectual capital, such as the ability to brew ale, as well as the cauldron in which it is made, and abstractions made concrete like the mead of poetry and the runes of wisdom. Not only does Ymir fit this pattern, mythologically speaking, his death and dismemberment is the paradigmatic model for this pattern. The Vikings, like the other Germanic peoples, were and are notorious for their eagerness for battle. It should come as a little surprise, therefore, that conflict is such a central theme in their creation myth, and that conflict is itself a generative force. Moving on, the next story I've got is, why is Odin one-eyed? Odin's quest for wisdom is never-ending, and he is willing to pay any price, it seems, for the understanding of life's mysteries that he craves more than anything else. On one occasion, he wounded himself with his spear, and fasted from food and drink for 9 days and nights in order to discover the runes. On another occasion, he ventured to Mimir's well, which is surely none other than the Well of Urd, amongst the roots of the world tree Yggdrasil. There dwelt Mimir, a shadowy being whose knowledge of all things was practically unparalleled among the inhabitants of the cosmos. He achieved this status largely by taking his water from the well, whose waters impart their cosmic knowledge. When Odin arrived, he asked Mimir for a drink from the water. The well's guard unless the seeker offered an eye in return. Odin, whether straight away or after anguished deliberation, we can only wonder, gouged out one of his eyes and dropped it into the well. Having made the necessary sacrifice, Mimir dipped his horn into the well and offered the now one-eyed god a drink. The interpretation of this story, the most general and obvious message of this tale is that for those who share Odin's values, no sacrifice is too great for wisdom. The sources for our current knowledge of the pre-Christian mythology and religion of the Norse and other Germanic peoples are, however, silent on exactly what kind of wisdom Odin obtained in exchange for his eye. But we can hazard a guess. The fact that Odin specifically sacrificed an eye is surely significant. In all ages, the eye has been seen as a poetic symbol for perception in general. Consider the astonishing number of expressions, both in everyday usage and in the works of the great canonical poets, that use vision as a metaphor for perceiving and understanding something. Given that Odin's eye was sacrificed in order to obtain an enhanced perception, it seems highly likely that his pledge of an eye symbolises trading one mode of perception for another. What mode of perception was exchanged for what other mode then? The answer to this question lies in the character of Mimir. Mimir, whose name means the rememberer, seems to have been the being who told the gods how to live in accordance with ancestral tradition and with wisdom more generally. In the tale of Odin's discovery of the runes, Odin sacrificed what we might call his lower self to his higher self. Here his relinquishment of an eye should surely be understood along similar lines. He exchanged a profane, everyday mode of perception, beleaguered with countless petty troubles, for a sacred mode of perception informed by divine ancestral wisdom. Next up we have Thor fishing for Jormungand. The gods had arranged a lavish feast with Aegir and Ran, two gracious and hospitable giants who dwell beneath the sea. Aegir and Ran offered to host the banquet, but only if the gods could provide them with a kettle big enough to brew mead for all the invited guests. The gods knew that of all the beings in the nine worlds, only the giant Hymir possessed a cauldron large enough for this purpose. Thor, the brawniest and bravest of the gods, as well as the one most accustomed to dealing with the giants, not all of whom are friendly to the gods as Aegir and Ran, volunteered to obtain this cauldron from Hymir. Upon the god's arrival at his house, Hymir slaughtered 3 bulls for provisions for the two during Thor's stay. The giant was shocked and dismayed. However, when Thor ate 2 of the bulls in one sitting to assuage his legendary hunger. Because of this, the angry giant declared they would need to go fishing in the morning for the next day's food. In the morning, Hymir sent Thor to procure bait for their hooks. Thor went to Hymir's pastures and slaughtered the biggest of the giant's remaining bulls, intending to use the head as bait. Hymir was now more irritated than ever at the rash youngster, but hoped his strength and daring would be of help on their fishing trip. The two got in the boat, with Thor in the stern. The god rowed them out to Hymir's usual fishing grounds, where the giant, to his delight, caught 2 whales. But then Thor began to row the boat further out from land. His companion grew fearful and demanded that they row back at once, because he reminded Thor, Jormungand lurks below these wild waves. Thor, the age-old enemy of that monstrous sea serpent, refused. At last Thor dropped the oars and cast his line into the water. After an ominous ominous silence and calm, Thor felt a mighty tug on his line. As he reeled it in, a violent rumbling shook the boat and whipped the waves. The giant grew pale with terror, but Thor persisted. His feet were planted so firmly in the bottom of the boat that the planks gave way and water began pouring in. When the serpent's head, with the hook in his venom-dripping mouth, at last came up above the water, Thor reached for his hammer. At this moment, Ymir panicked and cut the line. The howling snake slunk back down into the ocean. Thor, enraged at having missed this opportunity to end his greatest foe, heaved Ymir overboard. Thor, with the two whales slung over his shoulders, waded back to land, picked up Ymir's cauldron, and returned home to Asgard. The next story is titled Thor, the Transvestite. One morning Thor awoke to find his hammer Mjolnir missing. This was no small matter. Without the Thunder God's best weapon, Asgard was left vulnerable to the attacks of the giants. In a rage, he searched everywhere for his most prized possession, but it was nowhere to be found. The goddess Freya owned falcon feathers, with which one could change one's shape into that of a falcon. She lent these to Thor and Loki so that the hammer could be located. Loki knew how to shift his shape, donned the feathers, and flew off in the search of the treasure. He quickly surmised that it had been probably stolen by the giants, so he rode the winds to their homeland, Jotunheim. Upon his arrival, he changed back into his god form and approached the chief of the giants, Thrym. When questioned regarding the hammer, Thrym answered that he had indeed taken it, and that it was buried 8 miles below the ground, and added the lonely, ugly giant, he had no intention of returning it until Freya was made to be his bride. Loki flew back to Asgard and told this news to his fellow gods, who were alarmed and furious, especially Freya. As they sat in council, Heimdall put forth the following solution: that Thor go to Jotunheim, disguised as Freya, and thereby win back his hammer and take vengeance on its thieves. Thor protested, saying that this was a dishonourable and unmanly thing to do, and that all the inhabitants of Asgard would mock him for it for the rest of his days. Loki pointed out, however, that if he didn't consent to Heimdall's plan, Asgard would be ruled by the giants. The gods thereby obtained Thor's acquiescence. No detail was spared in the assemblage of Thor's bridal dress. After the humiliated god had donned the costume, Loki offered to go with him as his maid servant. The pair climbed into Thor's goat-drawn chariot and made their way to Jotunheim. When they arrived, they were welcomed by the Thrym, who boasted that the gods had at last brought him the prize he was due. At dinner, Thor and Loki found themselves in trouble. Thor single-handedly ate an entire ox, 8 salmon, and all of the dainties that had been prepared for the women, not to mention the many barrels of mead he drank. This made Thrym suspicious, and he declared that he had never in his whole life seen a woman with such an appetite. Loki quickly devised a response. The fair goddess has been so lovesick for you, he claimed, that she hasn't been able to eat for a week. Thrym accepted this answer and was overcome by a desire to kiss his bride. When he peeled back the veil, Thor's eyes glared at him so intently that they seemed to burn holes right through him. Never, he exclaimed, never have I seen a maiden with such frightfully piercing eyes. Loki, the master of deceit, explained to the giant that while Freya had been unable to eat, she had also been unable to sleep, so fierce was her longing for him. The ceremony soon followed. As was customary, Thrym called for the hammer to follow their union. When Mjolnir was laid in Thor's lap, he grabbed its handle and slew first the rim, then all of the guests, before contentedly returning to Asgard and changing back into his preferred clothes. I'm going to end with this story. I think I'm going to keep Ragnarok for another video. Loki Bound is the title of this one. Loki had always been more of a burden than a help to the other gods and goddesses. But after his contriving the death of Baldur and ensuring that fair god would remain in the underworld until the cosmos is destroyed during Ragnarok, he went about slandering the gods at every opportunity. At last the gods decided that his abuse had become too much, and they went to capture him. Loki ran far away from Asgard. At the peak of a high mountain he built for himself a house with 4 doors so that he could watch for his pursuers from all directions. By day he turned himself into a salmon and hid underneath a nearby waterfall. By night he sat by his fire and weaved a net for fishing for his food. The far-seeing Odin perceived where Loki now dwelt, and the gods went after him. When Loki saw his former friends approaching, he threw the net in the fire and hid himself in the stream in his salmon form, so as to leave no traces of himself or his activities. When the gods arrived and saw the net smouldering in the fire, they surmised that the wily shapeshifter had changed himself into the likeness of those he intended to catch for himself. The gods took up the twine Loki had been using and crafted their own net, then made their way to the stream. Several times they cast their net into the stream, and each time the salmon barely eluded them. At last the fish made a bold leap downstream to swim to the sea, and while in the air he was caught by Thor. The salmon writhed in the war god's grasp, but Thor held him fast by his tail fins. This is why to this day the salmon has a slender tail. Loki was then taken in his regular form to a cave. The gods then brought in Loki's 2 sons and turned one into a wolf, who promptly killed his brother, strewing his entrails across the cave floor. Loki was then fastened to 3 rocks in the cave with the entrails of his own slain son. Goodness me. Skadi placed a poisonous snake on a rock above his head, where it dripped venom onto his face. But Loki's faithful wife, Sigyn, sat by his side with a bowl that she held up to the snake's mouth to catch the poison. But every so often the bowl became full, and Sigyn would have to leave her husband's side to dispose of its contents, at which point the drops that fell onto the unrepentant god's face would cause him to shake violently, which brought about earthquakes in Midgard, the world of humanity. And this was the lot of Loki and Sigyn until, as fated, Loki will break free from his change at Ragnarok to assist the giants in destroying the cosmos.